To date, we've answered over 5 million contacts across the country. We are nearing a bittersweet milestone, which is 6 million contacts, which we anticipate will happen next year. And we're so excited for today, one, to have the Congressman here to talk about his support of all of our work that we do here, not only here in our area, but across the country, knowing this is such a pervasive issue, and a huge advocate of increasing funding to all of our programs through the Family Violence Prevention Services Act, which not only provides support and funding to the hotline, but to all of these incredible programs as well. One of the key pieces of this legislation that we are hoping will be passed and has bipartisan support is the creation for us as the hotline to explore another hotline that is specifically dedicated to those who are causing the harm, those who we would call the perpetrators of violence. We know that with victims and survivors reaching out and the incredible services that we're able to provide and pathways to safety and healing, one piece that currently is not being addressed is those who's causing the harm. And having a confidential place for people to check out their behaviors and create additional paths for safety will be incredible. So when this funding is passed, we're optimistic. We're going to say when, not if. We will create a think tank that will explore the strategies and resources needed to support those who might be causing harm in their families. And we're so excited that Congressman has included this language into the bill. Thank you for being a champion. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Congressman Doggett.
Thank you all very much. God, it's great to stand here alongside such devoted advocates. Appreciate what you do, what each of you do. It's not about a month, but it's about services that I know you are providing 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, making such a difference, actually saving lives. This is I don't know which, I count up the years, but the Domestic Violence Awareness Month began in 1987. And so much has been accomplished, and yet we hear some horrifying story on the news. It could be tonight, undoubtedly somewhere in our country, and we recognize how much work remains to be done. We're celebrating the progress, and we are recognizing Domestic Violence Awareness Month by providing some reinforcements, by providing some additional resources to get this job done. Right here with this domestic violence program, my initial involvement was when it was created, working to ensure that it came to Austin, and it did. About 10 years later, Senator Joe Biden came when we were over on Bee Cave, and we did a celebration of the 10-year anniversary. And this year we're celebrating many more years of service here with the help of the Biden administration, my friend from New Haven, Connecticut, Rosa DeLauro, who is the chair of the House Appropriations Committee. We've been able to secure a substantial, really a significant funding increase for this hotline to include, as Katie was just saying, a very important pilot program to deal with those who have caused domestic violence or fear they might cause domestic violence. We've just been visiting, and Katie says they've already gotten some calls like this in the past, and y'all have probably dealt with some also. My first familiarity with the problem came out of a town hall that we did in San Antonio with the whole purpose of the town hall was just to focus on domestic violence, and several people suggested that this was a real need there. So we have $1 million in this bill designated for the work that needs to be done to get this hotline focused on those who cause domestic violence as a new program, perhaps a new kind of hotline. And we have essentially a doubling of the amount of money that goes to this hotline, $25 million in the bill that we have approved in the House, and that I think, as Katie said, has bipartisan support over in the Senate. This is new funding that will allow for strengthening both the physical and the human infrastructure with this hotline. The contact volume has increased by about 43% over the last 5 years, but during that time, there's been only very modest increase in the amount of appropriations. We know what a spike we had during the pandemic, but it's not just the pandemic. It is all the stressful conditions of our time that contribute to this. And with these dollars, the hotline will be able to hire the staff to reduce the waiting time. So often, listening to some of these incredible calls that they have to deal with day after day, time is of the essence. It's an emergency situation. You don't want to keep somebody waiting on the phone, and it's not only taking that call, but it's the referrals that then need to happen to try to identify what is the most critical need that exists at that instant and how to save a life and prepare, I guess, for some of the damage that's occurred. This project will allow the hotline to bring together consultants, advisory council from around the country to explore who's done this locally in working with those who've caused violence, what seems to work the best, and how might it be developed as a nationwide program. There is some evidence from abroad. We know this is a worldwide problem that affects every economic level, every culture. But there's evidence from some work that's been done in the United Kingdom, for example, that such a hotline focused on those causing abuse can have significant benefits. So we're about trying to prevent the reoccurrence of violence in families, but also perhaps having a place where somebody who's right at the edge calls and asks for a little guidance, where we can get them to back off and never get in this very dangerous cycle. There are two other developments. Katie mentioned one of them, and that's the Family Violence Prevention Services Act. We will take it up and approve it probably next Tuesday or Wednesday in the House in Washington and send it over to the Senate. It is the official authorization for this hotline and for help to more than 1,500 shelters and training and technical assistance program around the country. I think it's been a benefit specifically to Asian Family Support Services here in Austin. And on other necessary legislation, we're not making quite the progress we would like, and that is the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act, or VAWA as it's frequently referred to. This has been very disappointing. We have had bipartisan support in the past, but because the National Rifle Association has opposed our correcting boyfriend loophole, as it is known, where someone in a dating relationship can get their hands on a gun. You've got a really serious problem that costs lives, and it is a vital program, vital part of reauthorizing VAWA to eliminate the boyfriend loophole. If someone were married, this wouldn't be a problem. And in the restraining order, protective order, someone could be denied access to a firearm. But when you know how dangerous this is and how many lives are lost, it's really important that we get this as a part of the reauthorization. And frankly, the Republican opposition to it in the House, though we overcame it, and in the Senate, is really indefensible. So much of what has happened on domestic violence prevention and responding to those who are the target of such violence has all occurred right here in Austin. The Texas Council on Family Violence, which I know Julia's been involved in for a long time, played the leading role in getting the Violence Against Women Act enacted in the first place. I actually got involved with them before they existed. Some of the women that formed that way back in my state Senate years as we got some of the first dollars out of Texas. But the national resources do so much more. I want to salute not only the hotline, but we're going to hear from the Safe Alliance, from the Hayes Caldwell Women's Center, which has recently been expanding, and from Asian Family Support Services. It is a month in which we can feel good about the progress that we've made, know that that progress is now being met with additional resources to do even more in the future, and to recognize and to say that people who are out there following the work of this hotline and shelters and programs across the country, that there is hope. There is hope for them as individuals who've been targeted by domestic violence, and there is hope in our reducing the great danger that still exists out there. Thank you very much, Katie.
Thank you, sir. think next we're going to have Melissa come on up and thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Congressman Doggett, for the invitation. My name is Melissa Rodriguez. I'm the Executive Director with the Hayes Caldwell Women's Center. And we serve a smaller population than what you see here in Travis County, but it is a fast-growing population. Unfortunately, domestic violence has been a pervasive issue in our organization since our very beginnings. We opened our doors in 1978. And as Congressman Doggett mentioned, we are in the process of developing some new programming. We are currently constructing a transitional housing apartment complex. One of the most difficult choices that the victims that we serve make every day is choosing where are they going to go after they come into emergency shelter. And unfortunately, what we found is so many of them choose to go back to their abuser because they have nowhere else to go. Affordable housing is a very real issue that they are confronting, even pre-pandemic. Post-pandemic has made it even more complicated. Last year, we served 2,055 individuals in all our services, and of those, the majority were family violence victims. About half of those are children. These are children living in these homes who have no other choice but to go where their parent goes and grow up in the environment sometimes that they're in. They were the focus of our transitional housing campaign, and that's why we're doing this work. We know that they need us to step up to the plate to give that parent that support, to give them those options and that opportunity and the time to rebuild their lives. So we're very excited. We get to open this in the spring. We're still under construction. We're still raising money, of course. So news of funding absolutely is such an important, critical part of the work that we're doing. This past year, we had a 52% increase in the length of stay in emergency shelter. So now is even more important that we get all the resources that we need to provide that safety and that security for those folks that we're serving every day. I also want to mention, I'm really excited that you're bringing on this prevention hotline for those who are choosing abuse and violence. We can't tackle this issue on just serving one end. We can't. The only way we're going to make a change and a difference in ending violence is by providing that support. Most folks that we work with don't want to commit these acts. They want choices too. This isn't something that someone is born one day and says, I'm going to be an abuser. It is not something anyone intends to do, but we do lack the resources and the support in order to give them that opportunity. So we hope that this is the beginning of something greater and bigger that we can collaborate with, and together we can bring that end to that violence. So thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you all having me out, and I'll turn it over.
Thank you, Melissa. Darlene?
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me here today. I'm Darlene Lanham. I'm the Executive Director of Asian Family Support Services of Austin. I'm delighted to represent the clients and community who we serve, who are the Asian and immigrant folks of Central Texas. And I'm particularly pleased to be among Safe Alliance, where our organization was born, and with Hayes Caldwell Women's Center and the National Domestic Hotline, who are like our favorite cousins, and of course a long leader and champion for the anti-violence movement, Congressman Doggett. Thank you so much. Asian folks represent 6% of the Central Texas population, and in Travis County, we are 10% of that population. We are actually Texas's 5th largest Asian population. There are 321,000 Asian folks in Central Texas, and actually we know that number to be higher because Central Asian and Middle Eastern folks and many Hispanic, Latinx, Tejanex, Chicanx folks identify as white on the census, and so we know that the population is much larger. 55% of Asian folks will experience domestic and sexual violence in their lifetime. And in the recent years, 25% of Asian folks nationwide are reporting feeling a deep fear for threats and physical harm simply based on their identity. In the pandemic today, the need for crisis services has never been higher. At AFSA, we are experiencing a 91% increase in demand for crisis services, and this is just the basic actions around making a call, asking for information, needing information and safety planning to create and make a safe space for yourself. At AFSA, We believe in the strength, resilience, and power of Asian and immigrant people because we do see it every single day as they face barriers and overcome those barriers to gain basic human rights, dignity, safety, autonomy. We're so grateful for the federal funding that is coming through. It is vital. It creates a foundational core on which services can be provided. It lays the groundwork for these essential services. It does require a match in many times, and so we know that there's still a need for state and local, corporate, foundation, and individual supporters to come together and contribute to the end of violence. And we know that together we can end violence, and we can create a world where violence and these tactics of abuse and control and power grabs are not used anymore and are things of the past. Thank you so much for your help combined with these essential federal dollars that keep services going year after year. We are grateful to be here. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Colleen.
you.
Beautifully done. Just set this down.
Julia.
I have to don the glasses, take off the masks, all the things that come with it. I'm Julia Spann, and I'm the co-CEO of the Safe Alliance here in Austin. And our organization has been around for 45 years. And we can probably best be identified by the names of our legacy organizations that we came from. It was the Austin Rape Crisis Center, the Austin Center for Battered Women, and Austin Children's Shelter. And like other organizations, such as Melissa's, we provide shelter, advocacy, crisis, intervention, counseling, housing, and so much more. And we're devoted to prevention. So I'm so excited about the possibility of this new initiative because we have to think about how do we stop it early, how do we intervene early, how do we not have children normalize in families where violence is expected and happens all the time, the amount of transition that occurs in their lives, the trauma that they experience. It all creates a future of a lack of stability for them, and the pattern goes on and on. But we can change that. We can change that. What we know is that bills like the Reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act is critically important. It's critically important. It looks at what's been wonderful about that authorization and that act is that it's grown over the years to increase in the learnings that we all have had. And now it is a true recognition of all the ways in which violence happens against women and children and men and in intimate relationships. So it has continued to grow to look at the intersections of what happens with the different types of violence and abuse that people experience and other forms of oppression, other forms of being disenfranchised. And all of this is critically important to us. I think the money is essential. We have to have the money to be able to keep people safe. But also, legislation is really important about setting mandates. I found myself twice today in conversations about what we call VAWA transfers in housing programs. It's an essential way to keep people safe, where you don't have to prove that you're a victim. You can get a VAWA, you can come in under that authorization, you can get some help with housing, and then if you need to transfer, you can do so. So it is such important legislation. And keep fighting the good fight about the guns. It has to happen. Last night I read the report from Texas Council on Family Violence that ties exactly closely the danger that guns in homes have on victims of family violence. This should not be a political problem. This is a human problem, and we can all address it so well. we are fortunate to have you as our forever advocate. We hope. I know you want to quit someday, but we hope you don't. Please don't. And to do our work with these wonderful partners in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julia.
That concludes our remarks. We wanted to open it up for any questions that you all might have.
I get the easy ones, and we got the
Yeah.
experts here to get the hard ones.
Feel free to put us in.
Congressman, build on this pilot program and what you are hoping that this is going to do.
Well, we have the expertise here. We have successes at the local level. They have experience. What I'm hoping we can do is to prevent many of these tragic incidents by working with those who would cause that violence. And in some cases, it's about reoccurrence, where something really bad has happened. And there are times when you can only separate, but when you can keep a family together by dealing with this, that's what the objective is. So, in short, it is safe, healthy homes together with no violence.
You know, for years, we've been hearing about these hotlines for years, you and I, when they first started. They're always after the fact, and we're always the cry for help. What makes you think that someone's actually going to pick up the phone and say, I'm thinking about doing this?
Well, I think the fact it's already happened. You've already taken some calls like this. I'm sure each of you have dealt with some situations like this, either before the first time. The first time is always out there, when often it's the third or fourth or fifth time. But when someone is calling on the brink of violence, or someone is calling after having committed violence, this is a chance to do something about it. No, it won't solve all of the problems, but it will be another tool to help reduce the many violent episodes that are out there. And I think we have the expertise right here to make that program work. We just need to get the resources to make it work.
Can we get some statistics of how big of an issue is that here in Travis County or Central Texas?
Sure, Julia, you maybe, each of you may have some thoughts on just, you
How big domestic violence is?
want to come up to the mic?
I spoke to the sheriff's department and they said 38% of their homicide cases
Yes.
have to do with domestic violence. How big is that here based on your experience and the population that you serve?
I think what I can probably tell you best, we do have at the office the statistics on police reports, and maybe you all have those off the top of your head. I don't. But I can tell you that we served almost 7,000 victims last year, and 3/4 of those were victims of domestic violence. And that's just in the Austin-Travis County area, and that doesn't include the folks that have also been served by the other organizations. And I'm sure it also doesn't necessarily include all the calls that have come into the National Domestic Violence Hotline.
Y'all want to add anything?
Well, yes, I did want to add, so I also,
Thanks, Julia.
also wanted to add that,
Melissa, ¿hablas español?
sí,
Okay.
Even better.
un poco sí puedo hablar español, pero.
And then in English, if you could say something in
Okay,
Spanish.
you got it. So the numbers, Julia, you shared are also not all law enforcement cases. So many of the victims that we serve don't have criminal justice involvement for lots of different reasons: fear, judgment, bad experiences sometimes. So the scope of the number is really hard to gauge because it's such a varied issue in so many different ways. We get people who call us who don't even realize that they're in that dangerous situation. They'll come in questioning, why am I here? My friend said I have to come. I've never been hit, so that must not be violence. But as we talk, we find out about sexual violence, we find out about emotional abuse, so many different layers to this. So even they have inability to identify themselves as being victims. I also wanted to just slightly comment on the question that was asked to you earlier about how do we know that prevention can work and will people call? There was a young woman from my community that was murdered in Austin a few years ago, and she was in a dating violent relationship. She exited, she left, he found her, and he convinced her to go with him. And what mom of the victim found out later was that he had reached out for help. He wanted to stop doing what he was doing, but he couldn't get anyone to help him. He got put on a wait list, and he had an appointment 2 weeks later. he murdered her 2 days before that appointment. So absolutely, this can change lives. It could have saved her, this young woman who had her entire future ahead of her. So absolutely, the numbers are difficult for us to gauge. And ¿quiere que le diga en español también?
Claro, ¿qué tan grande es este problema entre la comunidad latina?
A la comunidad latina más, porque tenemos diferentes causas también. Si no tiene los papeles, a veces eso se lo usan para controlar a las víctimas. Nosotros serviciamos muchas de esas personas que tienen diferentes, y también religión, la familia. Es bien común que la familia dicen, aguántate, así fue tu vida, ¿verdad? Y los no tienen tanto de decisiones que tienen para ayudarnos. Es mucho más difícil. Y si no hablan el lenguaje también es bien difícil para esas personas.
Can you just answer the part that you answered
Sure.
in English where you were talking about how important it's to help the aggressor, not just the victim, but how important
In
was-
Spanish?
En español, ¿qué tan importante es ayudar a la persona que está causando el
Sí, también esas personas necesitan la ayuda. Hay muchos tiempos que ellos quieren la ayuda, pero no saben a dónde pueden llamar, quién le puede ayudar. Víctimas, sí hay diferentes personas que les pueden ayudar. Puede ser Google y miran, aquí son los diferentes números que le puedo llamar, pero cuando uno es el que está haciendo la violencia, no hay tantos números que ellos pueden llamar. Es bien importante porque yo sé que ellos también quieren cambiar, nomás necesitan la ayuda.
And I would just, thank you, that was really helpful. And that for every, as people who are not working on these issues every day, we hear about this when there's a SWAT standoff, when there's an incident of gun violence and a horrible crime like you just mentioned. But we know that for every one of those reported incidents, there are literally hundreds of others that, if not stopped, may elevate to the evening news. And that's very much what we're trying to stop. I visited personally with Sheriff Sally Hernandez, who is really concerned with this issue. And yes, she says that 38% of their calls relate to domestic violence incidents. And I know from talking with deputies, with our Austin Police Department, these are some of the most difficult cases that they have to deal with. High emotion, where they want to lower the temperature and get people out safely. And anything we can do that will reduce those kind of standoffs and help get the perpetrator down from the edge is really going to save lives, and it may well save someone who is the perpetrator from going on to being incarcerated somewhere and doing something that he or she really knows they don't want to do. Other questions? Well, you've got the experts to stay around and visit with you individually. Thank you so much for hosting us and all you do, and thank each of you. It is a way to honor this month and all the pain that's out there, but also all the hope that you're providing through these programs. Thank you immensely.
Thank you.
Congressman, can we ask you a couple of off-topic, but maybe not with the ladies?
Sure, I'll come back there. I know you're stirring up trouble as you.
Thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it.